to be able to experience being here today. I wondered about where Arnold, Missouri got its name, and I thought of the pig. On Green Acres? Is that where it got its name? I haven't done my research about that. Usually I do research about a city before I go there, but I thought Arnold, Missouri, that's the first name of a male, and I just think that it's interesting that you have that name for the city, Arnold, Missouri. This is not my first time in Missouri, but it is my first experience that I've had to be in Arnold, Missouri. DeSoto, Missouri was a fantastic visit. We had a great workshop there, and I think it was maybe because of that when I ended up here with Cheryl Wayne. Cheryl Wayne, if you have not met him yet, is from Carthage, Missouri. He's from Southwest Missouri. He, like I, we are both widowers. We both lost our spouses. And he has also lost his health on 2 occasions, a 2-time cancer survivor. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be talking about all kinds of losses, not just the loss of a spouse. As a matter of fact, that is really in the background, the loss of a spouse, in this session and the next session. But then in a third session, it'll be a focus of attention. The Widowhood Workshop ministry is a grief ministry. It's not just a ministry to serve those who have lost their spouses by death, but it's a grief ministry named in honor of those who likely have experienced the worst loss of their life. That's why it's called Widowhood Workshop. An appropriate name, I think, for a grief ministry. I want to thank you for coming here, because I know you could have been somewhere else, but you chose to be here, and I want to express my thanks for that. I don't know if you prayed before you came this morning, but I found a prayer that somebody prayed. It said, "Lord, thank you for this morning. And so far I'm doing okay, God. I haven't gossiped, I haven't lost my temper, I haven't been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or overindulgent. And I'm really thankful for that, Lord. But in a few minutes, God, I'm fixing to get up out of bed. And from then on, I'm going to need a lot more help. Please be with me, amen." A public speaker that I heard that was speaking in the morning announced to the group that he was speaking to that morning, initially, he said, "I have got some bad news." Now, some of you probably take medicine in the morning, and I take some vitamins in the morning. But he said, "I've got some bad news. I took the wrong medicine." But he said, "I've got some good news. I don't have to worry about fleas for like 30 days now, and I'm all good." So I'm glad you're here. I hope you took your medicine, and I hope you spent some time in prayer this morning. And I hope that we have a great session. I don't want you to feel like this is a formal setting. I don't want to preach at you. I don't want to talk with you. I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk with you. I want you to feel free to participate in our discussion this morning. In the first session, what we're going to be talking about is life, love, and loss. And I want to confess to you that much of what we're going to be talking about this whole workshop, I did not think much about it all until I experienced loss. You know, sometimes in your life, you have what my youngest daughter calls these come to Jesus moments, these shocking things that really humble you and cause you to start thinking about things you never thought about before and feeling things you've never felt before. And that certainly is a part of the impact of grief when it comes to the loss of something really important to you. I want to start by asking you to think about where we live life. And so what I want you to do here for the next couple of moments is I want you to give me a word or a phrase that you would use to describe the world that we live life in. Give me a word or a phrase you would use to describe the world that we live in. Somebody get us started. At least 5. Yes, ma'am. Linda? Scary. Scary, okay. Yeah, it can be a scary world, okay. Give me another one. Chaotic. Scary. Chaotic. Cruel. You know, people talk about life not being fair. You mentioned the word cruel. And I agree that life is not fair. But the reality is it can be way worse than not fair. And cruel, bitter, tough. There are times that life bites so severely that it feels like it's taken a chunk of your heart out. I mean, life can be really, really difficult. I think that's 3. You owe me at least 2 more. Fulfilling. Okay. How in the world could life be fulfilling in light of the 3 previous things that were mentioned? It could be all of the above. Okay. You don't, in other words, you're suggesting that to have a fulfilling life, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be all a bed of roses. And you know who can help you to make that happen? His name's Jesus. We'll talk more about that. Can somebody give us another one? Hopeful. Okay. Hopeful. So when you stop and think about the things that we typically refer to, like in the last few moments, a lot of those things were negative. They were just, now they were real, they were true, but they were negative. And sometimes it can feel like that's a lot of what life is. We can have seasons or phases or experiences in our life that can cause us to think very negatively about life. Now, I want you to look at the image that you see on the screen and think about this. Every time your eye sees something, it sends a message to your brain. And every time you hear something, that audible sound sends a message to your brain. Okay, now you see on the screen an image. Now I want you to tell me, what does that image communicate to you? What does it tell you? Scale, okay. The blessings outweigh the burdens. Okay, the blessings outweigh the burdens. That's a teeter-totter. Hey, by the way, was anybody cruel with you on the playground? Yeah, on a teeter-totter? That can be scary, can't it? A teeter-totter? The blessings outweigh the burdens. Now, I'm going to read to you a verse in the Bible, and I feel pretty confident most of you have heard this verse before. I'm going to read it and not just quote it, because that way maybe you'll have a better sense that this really did come from the Bible. This didn't come from my brain, this came from the Bible. Now, this is going to be a statement that Job made, and it's recorded in Job 14, verse 1. Now, Job made this statement in Job 14, verse 1. Man who is born of woman, do you know of any other way to get born? Now, unless you're a politician, okay, you wouldn't suggest anything else other than that. Man who is born of woman is of few days. Now, do you agree with that? Few days? Who's the oldest? Who will brag about the fact you are the oldest person sitting in this room? Whether in the balcony or here. Who will brag that they're the oldest person? I'm going to reward you, so brag about it. Who's the oldest person who's here this morning? Give me a 80 and above. Raise your hand. Now, you have to be honest. This is the house of the Lord, okay? Okay. 85, raise your hand. Are some of you withholding information? Okay. Over 80? Only 2 of you? Okay. Raise your hands back up. Okay. Now, how old? 80? 82. 84. She wins. Cheryl Wayne, we're going to give her a gift. 84 years old. Now, when I explain the gift, I'll probably have some other people say that they're older than 84. They're finally being honest because they see the reward.
Don't get
okay.
hurried.
No, here's the one I want her to have.
Oh.
This is a really neat notebook. On the front of it, what we've got engraved on the front of this is forever faithful. Forever faithful. Let's give her that. And hey, Cheryl Wayne, you know, one thing we do whenever we give people gifts is we also take pictures of them. So here you go. Cheryl Wayne, here. Just use this. Okay, there. Okay. Thank you very much for admitting the fact you're 84 years old. Be proud of that fact. And you're at the phase of your life where if it's a percentage, you round up when you're asked about your age. Okay, man who is born of woman is a few days. Now, do you agree? Why do we have birthday parties for, let's say, 90 or 100 years? What? Okay, Linda, because we're blessed? Okay, and we want to celebrate that. And how would we describe the life that they have lived? In regard to the length of it, what would we say about it? Okay, blessed. But in regard to the time, what would we say? It's a long life. It's a long life. Okay. Few days. How could it only be a few days? What makes the difference? Compared to eternity. In Isaiah, the prophet, he explains that God inhabits eternity. God is an eternal being, and he inhabits eternity. Now, it's really hard, well, it's impossible, I think, for us human beings to comprehend the significance of eternity, because we live by clocks and by calendars and deadlines and appointments. And so we're very focused on time. Now stop and think about 90 or 100 years in relationship to eternity. Let me suggest to us this concept and this way of living. Always strive to look at something the way God does. I was driving in Jackson, Tennessee, and I was headed to a appointment with my nurse practitioner, and I was on Van Drive. I remember this significantly. It was about 18 to 24 months after my wife passed away. It was a phase in my life when I was fasting off of music. I could not handle music. I quit listening to all kinds of music after my wife passed away. A lot of music has romantic overtones, and I couldn't handle it. So I just refused to listen to any music. And that's a time in my life when I got hooked on AM talk radio and sports talk radio and news talk radio. So I was listening to this AM station in Jackson, Tennessee, and this guy had bought some time on the radio, and he was teaching or preaching. I have no idea what his name is. I have no idea what church he was from, but here's a statement he made that's emblazoned in my mind now. He said, wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. I thought, wow. He hit the nail on the head. Wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. When you see life the way God sees it, you have wisdom about life. When you see relationships the way God sees relationships, you have wisdom about relationships. When you see money and material possessions the way God does, you have wisdom about stewardship. Anytime that we come to understand God's perspective about something, we have wisdom about that thing. It would be really good for us to understand in regard to our time here in this life that we look at it the way God does. James 4:14, it's a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. One thing I keep reminding myself of here in especially the last year or so, I keep reminding myself of this: everything is temporary. Now, I talk about everything I'm talking about in this world. This workshop is temporary. My relationship with you in this world is temporary. My youth was definitely temporary, and so was yours. By the way, have you noticed how hard some people have it in regard to the loss of their youth? You know, we're going to be talking about how that we can lose all kinds of things that can cause us to grieve. Have you noticed how some people really, they actually have a hard time with the loss of their youth? But it's a reality. But it's hard to deal with it. Well, now again, he says, man who's born of woman is a few days, and then he says, full of trouble. Now, I want you to think about that phrase, full of trouble, and I want you to look at this screen up here, and I want you to tell me who's right. Full of trouble. What does full mean? If you have something that's full, what else can you put in it? Remember in Cana of Galilee, John 2, when Jesus was fixing, I'm a Yankee, and somehow this southern stuff gets ingrained in me. Fixing. We don't say that north of the Mason-Dixon line. But anyway, Jesus was fixing to turn water into wine. And remember what he told him in regard to the water pots? How much water in the water pots? All the way to the top. Now, when something's full, what else can you put in it? Nothing. Full of trouble. Was Job's life full of trouble? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, right here, that depicts Job's life. Even right then and there at that point in the story in Job chapter 14. Number one, he was still living. Is that a blessing? Do we thank God for the blessing of life? Okay. Number two, did he have a wife? Oh, but he had a bad wife. She wasn't a 5-star wife. Well, there is no 5-star wife. There is no 5-star husband. And by the way, I am her defense attorney. Let's be a little bit more careful to try to see things the way she saw them, to help us to think and feel the way she felt. That woman gave birth to 10 children and lost every single one of them. She lost her prosperity just like Job did. And she was crushed. And so, yeah, she stepped across the line, curse God and die. Well, curse God was way out of line. But the die part, I'm not so sure about that. Have you ever been in a situation where with somebody you've loved, that you've prayed for their recovery, you've worked and cared for them, and you've helped them to recover, and then it's not happened, and then over time it gets to the point where now you pray for the Lord to take them? Is that what she was doing? I don't know what the motive was. I'm just suggesting to you that maybe we're a little bit too quickly critical without thinking about what she's gone through and how it's affected her. And maybe this whole die thing, maybe it was a plea, a pitiful plea that the Lord would go ahead and take her husband because she saw him suffering so. He was married. Do you know how blessed you are if you're married? You're going to get an earful tomorrow if you're able to come. It's a real sad thing that sometimes we don't appreciate as much as we ought to what we have until we lose it. The blessing of marriage, I call it the unparalleled blessing. There's nothing like it. Nothing. An awesome blessing from an awesome God. He knew what he was doing when he brought Eve to Adam. And then he said, whoa, man, basically, this is awesome, this is great. Well, marriage is a wonderful thing. It's a divine blessing. And there's no blessing like marriage. And if you're married, hey, cherish every day. Go ahead and celebrate the landmarks, but cherish every day because it's a wonderful, wonderful blessing. Whenever you're married, you get to have somebody to share your blessings with, and that magnifies the blessing. When you're alone and you don't have anybody to share the blessing with, it's a totally different story. Now, when you're married and you have burdens, you share the struggle and the weight of carrying the burdens. So it's a tremendous thing to be married. And he was sharing the blessing of marriage and enjoying the blessing of marriage while he was having to deal with all the burdens along with her. He's alive, he's married, he's got friends. Now, again, I'm going to be the defense attorney for those friends. As a matter of fact, I'm going to talk about that later in the workshop. But the reality is, he had 3 friends that dropped everything and came to him. And they came with the right intent, by the way. Job 2 verse 11 tells you why they came. And they didn't come to nail him to the wall. And they didn't come to straighten him out. They came for 2 reasons. And it's in Job 2:11. So here he is. He's alive. He's married. He has friends. Does he have God? If you have God in your life, and you don't have anything else but God, are you more blessed than you're burdened? Let's start looking at this more openly and more biblically. What else do you need besides God? Brother Edwin White wrote a book called A Sense of Presence. And in that book, there is this statement. When we reduce life to its essentials, only one thing is necessary: to have God, period. And he's right. Job was a richly blessed man, a richly blessed, godly man, but he was in a terrible storm. And guess what that storm did to him? It caused him not to think straight. It caused him to lose his perspective. See, even great people of God with close relationships with God can really struggle about their thoughts and feelings in the scary storm that we might have in our life. In the next session, we're going to be talking about what grief does to us. And boy, it does a number on us. And we need to recognize that. Any of us, all of us. We're all human, whether male or female, no matter how much life experience we have or don't have, whether we are people of faith or not, the things that we experience in life that are losses have a significant impact in our life. And the better we get at appreciating that impact, the more patient we will be with ourselves and others who are struggling with loss. As a matter of fact, he struggled so much that in Job 7, verse 6, he said he had no hope, but yet he had God. See, sometimes the things we experience in life can just cause us to not be ourselves, not think normally, and even struggle with our faith. And that's okay if we keep struggling. There's a reason why God lets us. I didn't say forces us, but he lets us experience the troubles. Sometimes that's our greatest time of growth. So what we need to do occasionally, at least occasionally, is we need to remind ourselves of how blessed we are. And as we sing this song, and Cheryl Wayne's going to sing all 4 verses, he's going to lead us in all 4 verses, and the chorus only once at the end, okay? But when we sing this song, I want you to sing it watching the words more carefully than you ever have before, in light of what we just have talked about. Because a lot of times what we do at church is we come into church and we'll sing these songs we've sung for years. And what we'll do is we'll observe the Passover, not like the Jews do, but we have a Christian Passover. We come to a song and we sometimes just sing it rotely, without passion, without really much thought, because we know that melody and we've sung those words for years. Now watch carefully the words while we sing this morning. Cheryl Wayne?
When upon my pillows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Are you ever burdened with a load of care? Does the cross seem heavy? You are called to bear. Count your many blessings one by one, and you will see the days go by. When you look at others with their lands and gold, think that Christ has promised you his wealth untold. Count your many blessings money cannot buy. Your reward in heaven, know your home on high. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings who will attend, help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done.
You are never more burdened than you're blessed. Never. You are always more blessed than you're burdened. But you may not feel that way. Job did not feel that way. Aren't you glad that God is a long-suffering, patient, loving, omniscient God? He knows what we're going through. He also knows not only what we're going through around us, but what's going on inside of us. And it is helpful for us to focus on our blessings, especially when we're struggling. Now, what happens with blessings is we get to love them and we become attached to them. Do you think the boy in this picture intended to have his tongue stuck to the pole? By the way, does anybody remember what that boy's name is? Don't pick up your phone and Google this. That's not permitted. Anybody know the name of the boy whose tongue is stuck to the pole? Anybody? What? Who said that? Oh, we have a winner. Okay, my family has what's called, now by the way, the Widowhood Workshop ministry, if you read the material that you got, is my family's passion project, okay? Now my family has a golden chest of prizes. This is getting heavy, Cheryl Wayne. And
Give away a few more things.
what we need to do is we always make it a point anywhere we go. We want to reward people who have totally insignificant knowledge. He has just proven he has totally insignificant knowledge. So we're going to give him something out of here that he can carry with him. And there's just all kinds of really cool things in here.
He's thankful he took the toilet seat out.
Okay.
One time there was a toilet seat in there.
There's a Batman bandage in here. Here's some clothespins. If you hang your clothes on a clothesline. I mean, there's all kinds of cool things in here. So he's going to, now, you take your time and dig all the way down to the bottom if you'd like. But we're going to go ahead and continue to talk while you search. Okay. Okay, now I want you to think about how attached we can become to blessings, okay? How we can become so attached to them we love them, okay? Was there ever a car that you really loved, a car that you owned that you really loved? Tell me what was the car that you just really loved. Somebody give me one. 77 Cutlass Supreme. My father was a service manager for an Oldsmobile car dealership. You younger people have to deal with Googling that. Oldsmobile. Okay. Now, hey, Linda, did you get to keep that Cutlass like forever? Does it still exist? No, because then I bought a 65 Road. Okay. Woo, boy, you have high standards. You have very good taste in regard to cars. Okay. You know, you don't get to keep your blessings as long as you would like, do you? It's just a reality. You have blessings and you get them and then you lose them. And that's the way it is. Okay, now I want you to name me a few things that we human beings, we get, and then if we lose them, it could really shake us up. Name me something that you have that's a blessing that if you lost it, it would really shake you up. Your health. Okay. If you're told that you have cancer, or like my wife had Parkinson's disease, you know, when you're told that you have lost your health, it shakes you up. At that nurse practitioner's office I was telling you about that I was driving to when I heard that guy on the radio tell me about what wisdom was, he was a member of the Lord's Church, a brother in Christ, and before he came in that morning, I decided to handle our interaction differently. And so I was sitting there, he walked in, and I didn't say hi. I didn't let him have time to say hi to me. He just walks in, and I said, hey, Brent, when do people appreciate their health? What do you think he said, just like that? When it's gone. Yeah, when it's gone. That'll really shake you up. There's grief that goes with losing your health. Now, name me something else that you might lose that would really shake you up. Your job. Let me tell you about Clyde. Clyde was an accountant, high-level ranking accountant with Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Akron, Ohio. Akron, Ohio used to be called the rubber capital of the world. I preached in Hartville, Ohio for 33 years, which is about 15 miles outside of Akron and Canton, Ohio. And Clyde worked there. He would go in on Saturdays for a couple hours if he felt like he needed to. That's how conscientious he was. One day they walked in, this is at the 39-year mark, and they say, Clyde, we're going to move your job down to Nashville. Bridgestone bought Firestone, and then wants to move the headquarters down to Nashville. And to that, Clyde said, well, I don't want to go to Nashville. And they said, well, we don't want you to go to Nashville either. That's how he lost his job. Now, he was shaken by that. Now, they'd made a terrible mistake. I know a little bit of the inside information, not just from him, but my daughter. My daughter is a high-ranking accountant for Bridgestone in the corporate office in Nashville, and she told me some additional information. Well, things were a mess in Nashville, and it was because they cut him out without prepping somebody to take his place. So they go back to Clyde after a few months of him being let go, and they say, Clyde, we'd like to have you come back for a little bit and help us out. What do you think he said? What? No. He was so mad, he said, ain't no way, Jose. I don't want anything to do with you people. Do you think there's anger and grief? He was grieving the loss of his job, which he had permitted to become a great deal of his personal identity. So he was mad and he was hurt. So my daughter says, Dad, things are still a mess. So a few more months goes by, and they go back to Clyde again. Here's how they handled him the second time. Now, this is the part Clyde told me. He said, Dean, they came to me and they said, Clyde, what would it take to get you to come back to help us out for a few months? And he said, Dean, I named a number I knew they would not match. And they matched it. And he smiled real big. You know, it can be really hurtful to lose your job. Very, very hurtful, a very difficult time. You can grieve because of something like that, because your job becomes a part of you, just by nature, it seems, with us human beings. Name me something else that you could lose. Your health, your job? Okay, a child, a person in your life, that person has become a part of your life. And it's very hard to deal with only a part of your life left and a very important part gone. Give me something else, a thing that you might lose. Okay, well, yes, your faith. And then you start struggling and questioning yourself, as well as probably questioning God, His church. Your soul could become in jeopardy. It can be a very scary thing. And you can grieve that you're not the person that you used to be spiritually. Yes, Pam? Financial. If you have a family business and it tanks, or you have something happens that you lose a big chunk of your accumulated wealth in your life, that's grief. What about your home? Has anybody here ever lost their home by fire or tornado or something like that? Didn't those tornadoes come through here too? Okay. Now, what is the big deal about losing your home? Because here's what I know. If you give me your address, I have got a phone here with an Ohio State University case on it, because I was born in Columbus, Ohio. And there's a woman who lives in my phone. She's skinny and she's short, and I call her Miss Google. She knows stuff. I can plug your address into my phone, and I can find the overpriced value that Zillow puts on your home. And so when you lose that home, okay, you lost $400,000. Maybe $500,000, maybe $1.2 million. What's the big deal? Why is the loss of a house such a big deal? You're not taking that money nor the house to heaven, okay? But what's the big deal about losing the house? Memories. Okay, and possessions in it. Okay, what possession in a house that you could lose, that you could never replace, would you really grieve losing? Okay. What's the big deal about pictures? Do you know what a picture is? A picture is a piece of paper, kind of like cardstock, 3x5, 4x6 kind of index card, That's what a picture is. What's the big deal about the picture? The snapshot in time. What's it a snapshot of? Okay. It could be people. What else could be on that picture? Sometimes there's pictures that there are no people on, but they really matter to you. What's the picture of? and experience. Okay. Do you know what life is? Life's three things. I can describe life in three words: people, relationships, and experiences. That's what life is: people, relationships, and experiences. And when you lose that home, the big deal isn't the value. Now, you can live somewhere else. You can rebuild. You can build another home. You might be able to renovate what has been lost in regard to that home. But the reality is, the home is important because of the people who live there and the experiences that were had there, and the people that had those experiences that built the relationships in that home. That's why the home becomes of far greater sentimental value than financial value. What about the loss of your marriage by divorce? What about a young lady who is on a college campus and she's raped, and in that violent experience, she loses her virginity? Do you think she's going to grieve? Yeah. What about the young lady who's a godly young lady who, without doubt, has a heart for God, but in a moment of passion with her boyfriend, she gifts her virginity to her boyfriend, and she loses her virginity in that experience? Do you think she's going to grieve? Yeah. There's all kinds of things that we can experience in life that can cause us to grieve. Because we become attached to blessings over time with experience, we become very attached to blessings. And when we lose them, it really matters. And does nobody here have a dog? Excuse the English language there. Does anybody here not have a dog? Okay. Do you know there are pet cemeteries? There are. The coolest one I've ever seen is in Dallas, Texas. When Cheryl Wayne and I were driving to Wiley, Texas, from the hotel, there was this cemetery over here on the right, and I'm thinking, man, that's oil and gas territory. And I thought, man, there must be some rich people buried there. It was a pet cemetery. There's one in Goshen, Indiana, I've seen, and I've taken pictures of. We can become so attached to blessings that when we lose them, it shakes us up. What shakes us up is we have come to love them. And it's really hard to lose what we've come to love in the sense of being attached to. And when that happens, it really does shake us up. Our demeanor changes. Even our interactions with other people change. Our perspectives can change. Our emotions can change. Our mental state will change, and we'll talk more about this kind of thing in the next session about what grief does to us, but it will have an effect on us. Losing blessings that we have become attached to, whether it's a thing or a person, will have a powerful impact in our life. No matter who we are, no matter what our age, no matter how much faith we have, it will have an effect on us. The only question is how much of an effect and for how long. William Bridges is a guy who wrote a book called Transitions, just one word title, Transitions. The subtitle is Making Sense of Life's Changes. I'm about to save you 200 pages of reading in 2 slides. William Bridges is a worldwide known expert in the field of transitions. He goes all over the world and he speaks and trains organizations and businesses, all kinds of groups of humans. He trains them about transitions because this is a world where we experience change. So in this book, Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes, here's the basic concept of the book. And I wish I would have known this a few decades ago. It would have helped me to understand what was going on in my family as my family was changing. It would have helped me to be a better preacher as a local preacher in a church I dearly loved. It would have helped me better in my interaction with a school system that I volunteered with a great deal in that community of Hartville, Ohio. Now here is the book summarized in 2 slides. In this world, we experience change. There are basically 2 kinds of changes. There are changes that we choose, and there are changes that are forced on us. Now, I'll pick on Andy because I heard he's from this other state, okay? So he chose to come here. He wasn't forced to, he chose to come here. See, that's a chosen change. Now, sometimes I have friends who were preachers for a while, but then they chose no longer to be a full-time preacher, and they chose to get another kind of a job. How many of you have changed jobs in the course of your life? Okay, the vast majority of you. That's a chosen change. We can choose relocation, we can choose, and then, we can choose sometimes to not only relocate, we can choose to change what we do in regard to our job. We can change in regard to friendships. Sometimes we have to give up on a friendship. But sometimes we also initiate a friendship. We change our friendship community, if you will. Now, there are also forced changes. A forced change is like, for instance, when you get fired from your job, or you're told that you have cancer, or you are told by your husband or wife, I don't want to be married anymore. And then they leave you. And you're forced to deal with the loss of your marriage. And then there's the loss of people by death. We don't choose loss. We choose a lot of changes in our life, and some of them work out good, and some of them come back to bite us, right? But they're chosen changes. And then there are forced changes. Now, in regard to both of those kinds of changes, what that does is it creates a new beginning. Now, here is the critical point of William Bridges' book. Now, watch the next slide and what little difference there is. The time in between the change, chosen or forced, and the new beginning is what he calls the neutral zone. This is the time in your life where you are in transition and you're going to experience a lot of instability and uncertainty and hopefully some good things, but also inevitably some not so good things. It's a time of transition. We need to give ourselves time to adjust. This is not a time when you're going to be normal, okay? Normal, when change comes, especially loss, when we're talking about that change, that forced change of loss, when that happens, your life's just blown up. You can't go back to normal. You can't. Your normal doesn't exist anymore. And the reason it doesn't exist is because of what or who that you've lost. So going back to normal is an unrealistic expectation. But yet those unrealistic expectations are sometimes what makes our grief even more complicated than it really could be or should be. That's why we need to become more grief literate. H. Norman Wright made the observation in one of the books he wrote. He said, we live in a grief illiterate society. And he said, when you live in a grief illiterate society and you're experiencing grief because of your illiteracy and the illiteracy of the people around you in your social network, it's going to be way more harder than it could be otherwise. That's why we need grief education. We need to become more aware of the experience of grief because everybody experiences it. One of my favorite football coaches was from Texas, from Houston. Well, I associate him primarily with Houston, Texas, but also the New Orleans Saints. Bum Phillips. Now, you got to be old to remember Bum Phillips, and some of you guys may have been old enough to do that. On the sidelines, he looked so weird. He had a pair of cowboy boots, he had a pair of jeans, and he had a cowboy hat. There's nobody else on the sidelines of an NFL football team like him, on the side of the football field. One day, he made this observation. He had real wit about him, as well as a strange accent. He said, there's two kinds of people in this world who are NFL football coaches. He said, there's them that's been fired and them that's going to be fired. Two kinds of NFL football coaches. There are two kinds of people in this world. Them that suffered loss and them that's going to suffer loss. That's why it is so important to become acquainted with grief. Especially, it's helpful if we're more acquainted with it before we experience it. It's not going to make it easy. You can't make it easy. But it's going to make it more manageable. You're going to be able to negotiate the experience much better. During this neutral zone, it's kind of like, the way I depict it is I gave you a picture here of like a forest. It's kind of like you've been blindfolded and you're put in a helicopter, you fly over the helicopter, and then you're dropped out of the helicopter, hopefully with a parachute, into this forest. And then you take your blindfold off. And your job is to find your way out of the forest. But in this forest, there are no footprints and there's no pathway. So you've got to cut your way through the forest to get to the other side. Now, what's strange about this forest is though there are no footprints and no pathway, there are people. There's still people in your life. And some of these people in this neutral zone period in your life will be helpful. They'll give you a hug, a pat on the back. They will maybe minister to you in some way that will be very personal and be memorable, very effective. Those people probably are going to be few. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know. It's the grief illiteracy problem. Because people don't know about the grief journey, we don't minister to people as effectively as we could and should, and we definitely don't minister to them as long as we should to be helpful to them. And during this time when you're in this forest, you're going to have people who are not going to be helpful. You are going to be neglected by some of the people in your social network. Not, hopefully, not because they don't care, it's because they don't know. They're not aware of what you're going through. Now, there are also going to be people who are not only neglectful, you're going to have some people who are going to be hurtful. Not intentionally, but they're going to say or do things that are going to upset you, that are going to actually make things worse. Again, not because they don't care. One of the things we're going to talk about later in the workshop, those three friends of Job's, they came with all positive intent. Now, after a while, things went off the rail, okay? But the reality is, because of illiteracy and inexperience, people will say and do things during this period in your life that will be really hurtful. You'll want to smack them upside the head. I like the lady I met in Fort Mill, South Carolina, a southern suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. I met her and I asked her, she was telling me about this awful experience she had with her husband, who announced the day before his mistress was going to give birth to this child. He announces to his wife about the birth. She has no idea about this extramarital affair. And so I said to her, to kind of lighten things up a little bit, because that was so severe, I said, well, did you slap him? She said, I did in my mind. I slapped him. You know, sometimes it's good for us to learn how to slap people in our mind, because that can help us to be restrained when we want to slap them physically. But there are going to be people who are going to say things that are way out of line. I'll give you something to Google sometime. You know, there are people who really care, but they just don't say the right kinds of things. And we are all probably guilty of that. Dumb things, here's the phrase. Research this phrase. Dumb things caring people say. See, caring people can say dumb things just like heartless people can say dumb things. But there are dumb things caring people say. Now, before you Google that, kind of brace yourself, because you're probably going to find some things that you've said on that list. Things I said on that list I would never, ever say again. Let me give you an example. A young lady, she loses the child, and she's had a miscarriage. The older lady comes up to her, gives her a hug, and says, honey, this is going to be okay. You're young. You can get pregnant again. That is way out of line for two reasons. Number one, she doesn't need to be thinking anything about another child down the road. She needs her total focus to be on the child she lost. To grieve effectively, we really need to focus on what we've lost for a while and really internalize that to work through to get to a better place. So she's trying to promote her thinking about another child. And what's really out of line is for her to say, you can have another child. You can get pregnant again. How does she know that? That may never happen. She may never, ever be capable of conceiving again. Who knows that for sure? But see, there's things, but that was said with the intent of comforting. And when it comes to the session about the experience of losing a spouse, it can get way out of line when it comes to things said hurtful in regard to that loss. But you see the broader picture, I hope now. At this point, we're going to take a break here in just a minute. But here's what we need. Whenever we've suffered great loss and we're dealing with this forced change and we're wanting to launch a new beginning, but we're struggling in this neutral zone, this transitional period, what we need is the Lord in our life. I call this the Hobby Lobby verse in the Bible, because it's a verse you can find in some products, home interior products, at a place like Hobby Lobby. But those who wait on the Lord, we need to lean hard on the Lord. Sometimes in our life, harder than other times in our life, we ought to feel the need to do that. And there's benefit from it. Our spirit and our strength can be renewed, and we can go on with living. And I love the humble spirit of David. When my heart's overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that's higher than I. Isn't that a beautiful spirit to have when we're struggling? By the way, Sunday morning's Bible class, tomorrow morning's Bible class, Lord permitting, is a study of Psalm 31, where David was obviously overwhelmed, but boy, what great insight he provides in that same psalm. Well, we're going to take a break. Let's give a designated period of time. Can we do 5 minutes? How about a 5-minute break? And then we'll plunge right into what grief does to us. Now, did you notice that this was not hurtful? This was not a painful experience. Some people, when it comes to the subject of grief or loss, they just are so scared by it. But we can talk about this without it being hurtful. We even did some smiling and even a little bit of laughing. So I hope you feel free to come back in about 5 minutes. Let's give ourselves a couple minutes to get up and stretch and visit with others.